welcome to the Blue Boar Tavern. I'm Jonathan, your host and bartender. Come on in, find a seat. It's going to be one interesting night. We did this once before. It's ask or discuss anything, so it's free form. That tends to terrify us on this end because we can't prepare for it. But first, I want to say this Blue Boar Tavern is brought to you, as usual, by the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, devoted to the proposition that Shakespeare wasn't Shakespeare, but Edward de Vere. And chat amongst yourselves, that's especially important tonight. Use your chat buttons, questions and answers. We'll try to get to things and try to keep it in some sort of form here. But thank you for joining, as usual, to all our very, very loyal viewers. And to our future YouTube viewers, thank you as well in the future. Go to our Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship YouTube channel. Check out the videos. If you've been doing this for a little bit but haven't taken the leap, maybe you can join. Go to our website, Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, and look at all the information and videos. Yeah, I think that's it for now. I'll be checking out the comments as we go along and trying to bring some cohesive form to this with the help of our panelists. But I've been prevailed upon to pull out my guitar because in the Yuletide season back in Elizabethan and Henry VIII times, these events would start with the Boar's Head Carol, where there would be a processional and they'd carry in a big, disgusting dead pig's head, but apparently a big delicacy, and people would follow in. So that's how we're going to introduce our table regulars tonight. So let's see if I can remember all this Latin that goes with it. Oh, the boar's head in hand bear I, bedecked with bays and rosemary. I pray you, masters, be merry. Codestis in convivio, caput apri defero, read its loudest domino. Oh, the boar's head, I understand, is the rarest dish in all this land, which thus be decked with a gay garland. Let us serviri cantico, caput apre defero, read its loudest domino. Our steward hath provided this in honor of the King of Bliss, which on this day to be served is in reginensi atrio, caput apre defero, redens laudis domino. You all came in with that procession, I could tell. Hi, everybody.
Hi, John. That was a treat. Thank you.
We may have more later. We'll see what we have time for.
All right. Lucky us. How are you all?
How are you guys all prepared for our free-for-all tonight?
Yeah, we are. So why don't you explain?
What a lovely song.
Yeah.
So
why don't you explain a little bit to folks who haven't been here before what this episode's all about?
Sure.
Oh, bartender. Who are we and what are we doing here?
Away.
Do you want me to do it? You're going to do it.
Oh, I thought you were going to do it. Okay.
You do it.
Okay, what this is usually we have a topic and our regulars prepare for it and do some research and everything. This is what we did, I think, a year ago. It went over fairly well. You know, we're here with no preparation whatsoever. We're going to listen to our audience. If you have questions for us, we'll try to say what we think. And if we don't know, we'll say we don't know. And yeah, and hopefully it'll all build and we'll make connections with things. Phoebe has, it sounds like an interesting sort of game toward the end, just a little interesting thing to bring up conversation. So I'll let you handle that with maybe 10 minutes toward the end or so, you say.
And we may actually have questions for each other too.
Yeah, so it's all free form here.
Yeah.
This is improv. So let me see if anybody said anything yet. And Phoebe, you're good at keeping one eye on comments and one eye on what we're doing. So you help out
sure.
Here.
Maybe I'll say like 15 before the end if we can get to my 15. Game, just so that we're not like rushing it.
Okay. Let's see. I'm looking at things here. Um, shall we just leap in, everyone?
Yeah, I think if it's Q&A, like
Somebody
let's
says, what do you think is Edward de Vere's vulgar scandal? The big one. Stigma
mm.
of print, acting on the stage, poverty and dissipation, homosexual relations with Queen Elizabeth. What was the scandal that he seems to have been so tainted by and seemed so ashamed of in the sonnets?
I think my answer it will be different than other people's, but mine is having been seduced by the Queen of England and fathering a son by her that he can't talk about because his son had a sentence commuted from treason, which had had his head cut off, to misprision of treason, which merely means he was an accessory and knew about a treason, but he didn't bring it forward to the authorities, and had to give up any claim he had to the throne in order to save his own life. And that's my answer.
Anyone else?
I'm also Eileen, Prince Tudor. My first exposure to the Shakespeare authorship question was I saw Hank Whittemore's show on YouTube, his solo show, Shakespeare's Treason. And so that was the first I'd even heard of the Earl of Oxford. So I guess I'll always be prejudiced in that direction because it just sparked for me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as somebody who is very much not into the Prince Tudor, but I would be persuadable at some point. I try to be open-minded because I know there are many of my very
Same here. Yeah.
Oxford
Same here.
hits. And my mother came from who taught most of my early teacher, and of course, from whom I learned a great deal. She was actually very much opposed to the Prince Tudor. In fact, I don't know if I could say this on the YouTube, but mother, you may have to edit this out, somebody, but mother called it the son of a theory.
Wonderful. That's
She
wonderful.
really, sorry, okay.
I love it.
Honor.
I may adopt that.
Okay, well, one way or the other, but that's where she took a very dim view of it. And I believe, but it's interesting what the scandal was that caused him to, because when he was in his early 20s and first at court, winning the tournament, being the Queen's champion, he was golden. And he was the golden youngster. And somehow, after he got back from Italy, all that changed. And I think I think that when he was so incredibly cruel to Anne Cecil to be pronounced correctly, I think that started his downhill slide. And of course, he got involved with the Catholic plot, which he eventually told about. And I don't know, but he had those scandals, and those were. I think we tend to think in the more things were more harsh than on what we would say were minor factors in their life, that we roll with it because we're more enlightened, for sure. But that's just what I'm thinking, that it was a very big deal to him what he did and because Anne Cecil's father was so very important to Elizabeth and the Queen, that he treated her so very unfairly, and ultimately they worked through it and patched it up and had 4 more children. But I think this whole thing was very, very difficult with considering the enormous power that his father-in-law and that family had. And so, in fact, if you even look historically, historians, when you start to read about it, are very partial to Cecil and the Cecil family. And they're of course, we know historically through the centuries, if Oxford's name comes up, which it started to come up once Loney brought him to the attention of the authorship thing and Ward, but they automatically just start to kick the tires of Oxford. This is a kick him in the teeth. And they automatically want to present Cecil. And you could go read about Cecil in all the books. I've got a whole shelf full of them, somewhere sitting behind the bourbon and the scotch back there. But it's almost like it's an established thing that this is the proper way to handle it. But Oxford was in the foothills of that back then, and it's kind of, and he knew that he was in disgrace, as he wrote the poem, went in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes. And I don't think what he did now would be considered such a disgrace, but I think it was back then. I don't know if that answers the question or
Well, we
not.
know he was started out golden, as you said, and then something happened, but
Right.
what was that thing? And that's what
He
we're wrestling with.
definitely
Alex, do you have
fell
any
for
comments?
grace.
I'm having a little brain cramp here. Is vulgar scandal, is that Oxford's own words?
What?
Is
Where does that reference vulgar scandal? It's a
the reference to vulgar scandal, is
who
that
originally
Oxford,
wrote that?
is that Oxford's own words, vulgar scandal?
I don't know.
I hear it must be, I mean, I know Alexander Waugh has videos where he's like in, scare quotes, vulgar scandal. So I'm sure he's pulling it from some contemporary source, but I'm honestly not sure which.
The reason I ask is I'm at least an
Okay, vulgar
agnostic.
scholar. Oh, thank you. All right, vulgar scandal in the sonnets. Yeah.
Okay.
Sonnets. Okay.
As at least an agnostic on the Prince Tudor theory, and full disclosure, I edited Hank's first edition of the Monument, so
Oh
I
wow.
have some investment in it. But anyway, I was just thinking now, I don't know if Oxford would use the term vulgar scandal to refer to that relationship with the Queen. It's something a lot deeper than a scandal. And I'm wondering if scandal refers to perhaps a combination of other things, including his, being accused of not being the father of his first child, all the stuff that happened when he was in Italy, and the rumors that he wasn't the father, the fact that he had an affair with Anne Vavasor, one of the Queen's ladies in waiting, at the palace practically, as well as the more general unsavoriness of a member of the nobility writing plays for the public theater, or writing plays that eventually get shown at the public theater, and perhaps is even appearing in some of them. It could be any one of a number. It could be any one of a number of things, but I'm wondering if he would use the term vulgar scandal. To me, that underestimates the having a child with the Queen.
I think the scandal is actually the Essex
Yeah.
rebellion. The fact that Southampton participated in it. And, you all know my position, which is I think that Leicester raped Anne Cecil. And Oxford always said that Elizabeth Vere was not his child. He maintained that for years. And as a matter of fact, stated in court, if she's pregnant, it's not by me, which is, from he knows whether he slept with his wife or not. Anne knows whether he slept with her or not. But everybody else, all of us today, it's all speculation. But I think that Anne was raped by Cecil, and she came to Oxford, and they tried to get that abortifacient from Thomas Smith, and you got the letter that Mildred writes, basically biting Smith's head off. How could you give my daughter this? And then he writes back. So I think Oxford's position was, I never wanted to marry Anne. I was waiting 2 years to get divorced from her. She got pregnant, not by me. There's a huge scandal right there. But I'm kind of thinking with Alex, it may have been accumulation of things, and that maybe he was referring to his entire life as one huge scandal.
Yeah, for me, I think of the Phoenix and the Turtle as and kind of the response to that publication, and a lot of what Ben Jonson and De Vere's friends do, and like the aftermath as also kind of corroboration, just because some people are asking about other evidence towards Prince Tudor theory. I don't want to speak for Hank, or I feel like we should address other stuff because and not just only do Prince Tudor theory stuff. But
we should move on.
Yeah, but I do also reference, I think there's a really interesting discourse to be had around like the Phoenix and the Turtle as, kind of telling a story in code, as it were, about the love affair and heir produced by Queen Elizabeth and Edward de Vere, potentially.
And Venus and Adonis and the rape of Lucrece. Because I think those two poems really tell the story. That's the evidence.
I'm going to jump to one here. Somebody asked about de Vere's death. Was Edward de Vere's death noted by other poets? Is there any real evidence he may have committed suicide? Some speculate that there's actual evidence that he died of the plague. Somebody responded to that. The only connection The plague seems to be that the word plague is on the church register on the same page, whereas death, but not even close to his name. Any thoughts on Edward de Vere's death? Anybody?
Well, this is just something that I've been coming across recently. Robert Prechter and I were having a conversation about that I'm going to put on my YouTube channel about the different musical voices that Edward de Vere did in court. And so he's arguing, it just kind of jumped to, like, for me, there's several voices that come out, and it'll be like first book of songs, second book of songs, and then book the last, not just like book number 3, but he, towards the end of his life, starts like labeling things like the last book of songs. And you can see in a lot of his song lyrics, I don't know, for me, I've always been kind of leaning towards the idea that he was in this very dark place and maybe died at his own hand. But it's just interesting, something that I've become more recently aware of De Vere seems to be very aware that he's wrapping up his affairs, and that whether it's through illness and infirmity or just, through other kind of darker forces, that I think he knows the end is coming pretty clearly. I don't think he's surprised at all when he dies.
Something that is really amazing. And there was an article, if you are written for the Oxfordian, and it was by the very fine researcher Christopher Paul, called Monument Without a Tomb. It was published in the Oxfordian around 2005, 04 sometime. It's been around a long time, but one of the things that he did in it, if it maybe, I know he did it, I think this article, but he went through all of it. It says, it's the person asked, who noticed? Well, he went through all of the communications that we have, or most all of it, and not one single person, contemporaneous person, in all the various and sundry letters. We have the correspondence of Dudley Carleton to Chamberlain, and we have the Roland White to Robert Sidney. I mean, there are lots of these, and not one single person noticed. I didn't totally believe Chris Paul's article, so I went over it all myself, and guess what? He's right. But one thing he didn't have in this is the Cecil. We have all of the Cecil communications that they're willing to give us in the manuscripts of the Marquess of Salisbury, and they were published hundreds of years ago. Whatever is out there, and there's not one comment to Robert Cecil at any time on the death of his brother-in-law, who he happened to despise. Now, that can't be. Somehow, either nobody noticed, or the record has been sanitized.
Or again, I'm going to put a theory out there. You guys can knock it around. I hope you do. Or he merely chose to disappear.
Well, if he disappeared,
And the earldom.
I don't.
He emptied the earldom of all the assets. Remember, there are no assets in the earldom, so that his son is not going to be scooped up by someone as a juicy ward, because there's no value to taking over Henry de Vere's earldom. So it goes to Elizabeth. He moved all the assets out of the earldom. He put them in the joint ownership of his wife and his cousin and her brother in all of these trusts, right? And then he dematerializes, becomes simple Ned Vere, and goes to the domains, lives his life, and continues writing until 1609, when the sonnets get published, and that's the signal. It's another theory. Have a knock at it, but I kind of...
Somebody says, did De Vere fake his death and come to America? Wouldn't that be great if his real grave was here?
I don't think so.
Maybe he was the writer on Southampton's Boat the Angel that found Penobscot Bay in Maine. I'm just saying.
I bet he was off in Massachusetts
You can
somewhere.
make those facts fit.
Yeah.
No. His death is recorded in the church records of Hackney, the Hackney Church. I forget the name of it. And it was recorded twice. And,
Right, and interlineated, wasn't it, Bonner?
No,
Wasn't
I don't-
interlineated out of
No.
order? Yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah, you take
I
a
think
look
one
at
of them, there were two of them, and one of them was out of order, but
Yeah, it's out of order.
death was recorded there. And in fact, Lady Lennox was buried there, which is one of the reasons why I think he was initially interred there and then moved to Westminster Abbey. Now, I do go with that. Because Lady Lennox was interred at the Church of Hackney, and then she was moved to Westminster Abbey, so that gives some precedence for it. So I think, and then moved to Westminster. So I think that basically his death was acknowledged in correspondence considerably, and that there's been so much control of the correspondence and what gets reprinted through the centuries that all records of what people were saying have been stripped. That's what I think. Okay.
Yeah,
I'll
I
turn
guess the most we can say is it's something
You're the
strange that
Cecils at work, Bonner. The
Well,
Cecils.
yeah, the Cecils were pretty powerful.
I think what most we can say with certainty is, yet again, with things Shakespeare related, there's just a big weird thing going on that this person died and there's like not really much acknowledgement of it, and he was like the top noble.
And if he disappeared, there would still be notice of his disappearance. In fact, in 1595,
yeah, nobody talked about it.
Yeah, there was a record.
He wasn't dead.
It's an Alan. Well, the record is in Alan Nelson's book. When it's one of these correspondences, I forget now which one. Chains of communication. When some say the Earl of Oxford is dead, I'm getting it, I think, pretty verbatim. And here's, of course, he's not. So it's just because rumors were floating around all the time, and these gossipy court people like Dudley Carleton or Chamberlain de Carleton, they were interested in the communication. And he was still the Earl of Oxford. He was the Lord High Chamberlain of England, and his death would have been noticed because he had an office to perform as Lord Chamberlain in that. So, and then there was the what do they call it? The Inquisition post-mortem, and that when everything that he had was given to his son Henry de Vere and the office, and then somebody else is going to do the office because Henry's in his minority still, but it's sort of the standard stuff that happened when an earl died. Now we know he was an impoverished earl, but there seems to be enough of the usual scheme of things surrounding his death that the fact that there's just no chatter tells me that there should be chatter.
Yeah. Well,
that's where I am.
The other thing that I do is I always say, follow the woman. And I did not talk about this in my talk on Elizabeth Trentham because there was so much going on, but there are some very interesting places that she went following 1604 and stayed for quite a long period of time. So I'm just going to say that, and
I'm so curious. I'm so curious. We also have to.
I thought she stayed at King's Place.
No, not. She maintained it, but she actually she actually moved she moved into the house that they had closer to the river. She kept King's Place, and I think really as an asset to sell. But no, they were living closer to the river opposite Elizabeth, Vere, and Stanley for quite a number of years, closer in town. But no.
She had a London home, in other words, and I do know
in London home, right? And then out there, and then of course the domains, which do not belong to the king. They are independent entities, which under which the law of England does not apply.
When Reem is here in March, I guess, if that's not a spoiler, we got to ask her, because she has like a really tantalizing detail where, we all think that Oxford was sort of expelled from court in his later life and he wasn't showing up regularly. But she says that there's an account that she found in Russian where it's like a Russianized version of like Oxford. Like she thought that it was somebody was saying that he was there, like a Russian ambassador had seen him there and said his name in a Russian version. So we got to get her testimony on that.
Oh, wow. Regarding his death, I think one thing we're all hoping for is when they use this like ground penetrating stuff to search around Westminster Abbey to see if there are any unknown skeletons near that statue. Alex?
Well, I was just going to say, let's not forget the other possibly coincidental or non-coincidental event that on the evening of June 24th, Oxford's supposed death date, Southampton is arrested, taken into questioning, and then let go the next day. And this fact is documented only in foreign archives
and also
communication from envoys.
Alex, aren't his papers in his Southampton's papers rifled through? I mean, his library and his papers are rifled on that day as well. So clearly,
just a coincidence.
Just a coincidence. Looking for those drafts, looking for those poems, but they weren't there. They were somewhere else.
So as usual, these Ask Anything episodes just bring up more questions and frustrations than answers. So here, this has come up twice here. Bonner, so I hope this doesn't put you on the spot. Somebody says, hoping Bonner might give us a sneak peek about Gresham College, if it's not too rude to ask. Somebody else says, what can Bonner tell us about her recent discoveries about Gresham College? To tell you the truth, I don't know what this means, Bonner. Can you?
Well, in my talk at the
Tell
Denver
us anything.
conference, which was taped, I had run across the about Ben Jonson, who is a deposition that he gave in October of 1623. This is pertinent to the first folio, and that he describes himself as of Benjamin Jonson of Gresham College, and it was found, this reference was found in 1951, and I went to a great effort to get somebody to help me track it down. And then I got the actual deposition for the original of it out of the National Archives. And one thing I bring to the table, a few people know about this deposition, but one of the things that when you see it with your own eyes, you realize that Ben Jonson signed it. It isn't somebody just writing about him. I mean, it so nails it down that this is where he is and this is how he describes himself. And what this tells me, although there is somebody who wrote a book about Gresham College that apparently was vehemently opposed to this notion that he is living at Gresham College at the time the first folio was underway, where he could have a team of people who are taken care of by the staff of Gresham College. They've got the place where they can work. They've got apartments where they can live. They have a staff to furnish them with food and drink and beverage, which was, of course, very something that Ben Jonson was very keen on. So that's the deal about Gresham College. It's basically not so much pertinent to Oxford, except that we do start to wonder where were the manuscripts from the time Oxford died in 1604, and now he has the manuscripts are copies of them, as some people think, and this is where I think they go to. I think they go to Gresham College. And I think this deposition nails it down because it's not a letter. It's a deposition, which at that point in time, as this day, is under oath. And I don't think he would have lied. And I don't think it would have been if it were a superficial place. Because Ben Jonson lived a lot of places. He lived under the patronage of a number of people all his life. And so I think he's very serious that he has a very serious connection to Gresham College. And we can delve into that more at a later date. But that's what I put forth.
And
Thank you.
when those videos, the videos from the Denver conference are being released in batches, and you will be able to see Bonner's presentation at that point.
As briefly as you can, somebody asks, could each of you, this is gonna, we'll have to be very brief. Could each of you say who you think are the fair youth, the rival poet, and the dark lady of the sonnets? Can we just like throw out a few names here? I mean, this could take a whole show.
Well, I feel like that's kind of, we did the Prince Tudor, we talked about the different.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually, I'd also like to say that those names were not Shakespeare's names. Those names are actually, and I'm going to blow this and someone's going to correct me, please, 18th or 19th century terms that were labeled onto individuals. So when we use them, you're using a much later term for
Sort of.
personages that are described in the sonnets, but they're not the poet's descriptions.
Sort of retrofitting.
Yeah, it's kind of retrofitting
tack
terms.
onto it.
I think we probably discussed that one.
Here's an interesting one. Why do we have so few letters De Vere must have written? I can understand how letters to him were destroyed by the Cecils, but how to explain the disappearance of letters from him that other people would have?
Other people would have gotten. I see what
Yeah,
you're
that might have been in archives and other
I think there's wonderful research that people do looking for them, but honestly, a 450-year-old letter, unless I think we don't appreciate what incredible archivists the Cecils were. And I have a lot of admiration for a lot of things the Cecils had done. I also think they were in it for the Cecils, but they were extraordinary archivists, and they really preserved a huge amount. There's letters that Stanley has, there's letters that Johnson had, but Johnson had a big fire, and we know that there's some Oxfordians with some fascinating theories about what was in those fires, and it could have been De Vere's letters as well. I just think that anything that survived outside of a family archive is remarkable good luck.
There may be
Maybe
some
love
letters
letters
that
to
still
Aunt Abbess
exist that haven't been discovered yet.
Could
There
be.
may be some in private archives. There's an awful lot of stuff that is uncatalogued.
Yeah, big boxes of stuff, big boxes. I mean, if you go into some of these, particularly in foreign countries, you could probably find letters that he wrote to people he met while he was abroad. But, you know, you're going to go to the family of the family, you know, it passes through multiple generations down different names, different lines, and go through the box. If you find it, that would be fabulous.
Well, Edward de Vere has 70, the number is 77 letters. And some of them are very extensive. Like one of the letters that he has written to, he wants the letter to be given to the Queen, and so he's addressing it to Thomas Egerton, who is the Lord Ellesmere, who will be, and is I forget where he was at that point in time, but maybe Lord Keeper of the Great Seal. But he's using Thomas Egerton as his to get to the Queen, and that's a 4-page letter. And I think everything's been published by Alan Nelson at some point. But I do have a copy of it that Mother extracted from the Ellesmere papers at the Huntington. And they're all available to be, you have to write to Huntington and you can get it. And but there's a ton of information in these letters. And of course, the book that William Plummer Fowler wrote, that Shakespeare revealed in Oxford's letters, where you just go, and I tell you, it's shooting fish in a barrel. I did this with just the Ellesmere letters at the Huntington and the letters that Mother had extracted from the PRO. She had a researcher there that she paid, and I believe that researcher found them, and then she worked with Plummer Fowler to transcribe them into modern English and worked on them. But at any rate, I just did what Plummer Fowler did. I took the concordance and just went back and forth line by line, and he's setting out the Shakespeare canon right there, all kinds of stuff. Yeah, and like I said, it's so easy. I used to say it must be beginner's luck that I could come up with all that, but it's just there, and it's really, and I need to set that all out. That's one of my projects that I've never really finished properly. So, but there's plenty enough to be convincing to a lot of people that the person who wrote those letters is one and the same as the person who wrote the Shakespeare canon. And then, of course, you have all sort of wonderful stuff on top of it, like Roger Stritmatter's work on the Geneva Bible. And I don't know why people don't say they're smoking guns, because as we know, there's about to be more smoking guns, more smoking cannons.
Somebody brings up, let's talk about Roger's discovery at Audley End. This
okay.
is documentation of his process. And I'm just going to say to that one, wait a couple months. Roger will come back here, and we're going to talk more about that with Roger himself right here in this pub.
I also think that I love the Edward de Vere's introduction to Cardanus's Comfort. I think of that as, I mean, kind of a smoking gun, where he has all the as such kind of the very euphuistic constructions of sentences, where he's saying, oh, a rose that smells like any other type of flower is, I mean, I often bring that up and I'll read it to people, like, and I'll say, doesn't this, you know, I mean, I think that is a writing sample, because it's been for, you know, literary consumption more so than his letters about, like, you know, tin monopolies or something is very Shakespearean.
Yeah. Somebody says, no, we don't have to wait to talk about Roger. So can we do a short, brief bit on Roger's, because he was here earlier talking about his.
Yeah.
And they're pretty mind blowing. Can we do a quick summary of it?
You can do a quick summary. So Roger and Shelley Maycock took a trip on Audley End and found some very interesting books in the library. Cassius Dio and the other one, someone's going to tell me what it is in a second, which had handwriting notations in the margins in script. There had been, I believe, a paper that someone opined it was North's handwriting, and
I think it was Henry Neville, right?
Tacitus. There's somebody mentions Tacitus.
I thought it was Henry Neville's hand, not North.
Or maybe it was his hand. Am I mistaken? Okay.
But I think Roger said that now he found both. Neville is in it, but also de Vere. Did he say that?
De Vere. I think he's saying that, right. And then Roger did a program here on the Blue Boar almost a year ago in January of this year, which you can find on YouTube if you want to review it. It is there, describing the parallels between the handwriting, the citations in the history books that were underlined, and very specific passages, including Cleopatra's blush, which is found in the text of Antony and Cleopatra. So we have very exciting news. Roger will be back to us. I think the date is February 5th, although don't absolutely pin me on that. And he will be back to discuss the handwriting, professional handwriting analysis by a forensic handwriting analyst that has been done on those works. So,
and I think for me, the thing that impressed me so much when Roger was here earlier, and it's what Cheryl says, is it looks like physical documentation of his process as a playwright. Like he's reading his research, writing notes that almost seem like he's writing, oh, this would make a good scene. You get that feeling, oh, this is an important thing that would translate well to the stage. And you can sort of see him reading the research and thinking out, oh, let's put this part in, let's put this part in. Stage directions, it almost struck me. That's a term I used at the time.
And the thing too is what you're looking at in Oxford some of the, I'm seeing some of the comments coming back at us. Yes, most of them are in Latin or Greek, and his incredible fluency. Be reading it and making his comments in these languages show a powerful ability as a linguist.
Yeah, sort of. If that's his handwriting, which people say it sure looks like it, that sort of blows out of the water this whole idea. Oh, he was just this shallow nitwit who got honorary degrees and didn't really know this stuff. No, he knew Greek fluently. Somebody says, what images of De Vere do we have besides the Welbeck, the young one of him, the engraving of him as Apollo opposite Burleigh on the title page of John Gerard's Herbal?
Yeah.
What do we know for sure is him, other than those?
Well, there's the miniature, right? The
miniature, yeah. There's a young De Vere as a miniature, right, with a head full of curls that are kind of red blonde curls and just the faintest mustache. There is
the one
another.
I was thinking the one where he's in that kind of beautiful, like bright blue, where he seems older.
Are you talking about the one with the hand that's coming down, the one that's
the hand one,
yeah, the little miniature in the V&A that looks suspiciously like the young man a few years later with this hand, this elegant hand of a woman kind of coming down from the clouds.
Are these, somebody's asking, are these interpretations or guessing that it's him, or is there actual, are any of these really pinned down?
Yeah, I think one of the young man with the hand of the lady, the mysterious lady coming down, is not signed or attributed, and I'm not sure about the other miniature.
I recommend checking out David Shakespeare's YouTube channel.
From there.
He does one called like The Face of Shakespeare.
Yeah, so, and then of course there's the Ashburn, which leaves everybody wondering. There's so much that's been written about that, talked about that. What else? There is one that Elizabeth Wagaman pointed out people often mistake as being Oxford. It is a man with a darker beard, a very small ruff in a white jerkin, and it's the Earl of Oxford. The trouble is, and Elizabeth's eye caught this, not mine, but I think she's 100% right, that is John.
No.
16th Earl.
No, it's not. It can't possibly be.
Is too early. That's her point of view.
She's wrong.
She's wrong about it. Okay, tell me why.
Because that is, the costume is a pattern that people from the 60s and 70s wore, and it's all over the place. And the portrait is the Gerhardts, and Gerhardts did a lot of sort of surreal things. The thing about the Gerhardts, it is Oxford. It's got the name on it. It can't possibly be his father, because from the 60s and 70s, where the costume comes from, it's way too light for the man who died in 62. Because what we have for the father was painted in 1540. And for some reason, the De Vere Society's picked that up and they've flip-flopped them. They believe that the painting from the 1540 is Edward de Vere, and I don't know if they've thought this, but it's not, because he's wearing Henrician garb. And the date on it, that had a date, and the date was 1540. And then they were saying, well, it's Edward de Vere, and he was born in 1540, which isn't true. The date is 1540 because that's when John de Vere became the 16th Earl of Oxford. And what they did is they celebrated very important times in these meaningful times in people's life. So that's where the one that's supposedly Edward de Vere, but no, it's John de Vere because it's Henrician garb. This garb is exactly like a whole lot of important people. The one that the Gerhardts were painted in, one that was painted in, it was none other than Gresham. Thomas Gresham's wearing that. I've got dozens and dozens of places. The Earl of Leicester is painted in that. It is possibly a retrospective of Oxford. And I don't believe it's early. I believe it's on the late side of his life. And
Hair and beard are extremely dark.
he is
And
being
the nose is entirely different than the
well,
young man.
the reason for that, the nose isn't actually, if you look at the thing on the Gerard thing, it's very similar to exactly the pose on the Gerhardts. But the deal is the Ashbourne and the Welbeck are almost identical. And you can see this, lots of people have done this. It was first done by a Reverend de Vere in the 1930s or 40s. But basically that comes from a face pattern. They use face patterns all over the place. And it's the reason Gerhardt's is different is that Gerhardt's is using a different face pattern. So, but you've got identical between the Welbeck and the Ashbourne because you've got the same face pattern. Something that nobody's written about, and I need to do a deal on it, and I've actually been fussed at by somebody very important to me that I admire immensely. And she said, Bonner, I've never heard of face patterns, and you're full of bull on that. Well, just get Roy Strong's Tudor and Jacobean Portraiture. And he talks about the face patterns. For example, Robert Cecil only has one face pattern. He's had once for an artist. Everything else you see from Robert Cecil comes from this one face pattern. He actually goes, what Burleigh sat for, I forget now whether it was 2 or 3, but then this myriad of portraits of William Cecil. They're all over the place, all over England to this day. And in museums, they all came from either 2 or 3 face patterns that can be very well identified. It's a big guess whether, or one of those controversies in art history, if they only have one face pattern for Francis Walsingham, and whether the particular portrait was painted new and fresh from someone sitting for it, or whether it came from the face pattern. But it's interesting because all you need to do is get Roy Strong, and he assesses all of these portraits from the Tudor and Jacobean timeframes and talks about it. And I don't know why somebody got so mad at me over it, because basically, in fact, one of the reasons that convinced me that Catherine Children's portrait that looks sort of like a comedian portrait, and Elizabeth Wagman, when she did the article on it that I read in the Oxfordian, she didn't mention this. She showed how similar it is to the older sister who becomes Lady Windsor. You're looking at the same face patterns because face patterns also often were repeated in families. If you look at say, Risley, and I've had the Earl Southampton, he looks very much like the portrait of his mother, Mary Brown, because you're looking, maybe they resembled each other closely, but these artists had a way of defaulting toward these doggone face patterns. They kept them and they reissued them and they changed them up as the person aged, which is why you have a younger face pattern. I think the original that Oxford sat for, and possibly the only one that he actually sat for, was the Welbeck that was painted in Paris. And they say it's a copy. The people who own it say it's a copy, but it's too good to be. It's awful good if it's a copy. And I believe that the Ashbourne came from that same face pattern, and the Gerhardts came from a different face pattern. So you get differences depending on, and I'm not sure that Gerhardt's painted. Another thing is I'm not sure Gerhardt's painted that painting from life. So he's getting a face pattern that's it's all over the place. And does that explain anything?
That's really
It shows-
interesting.
Tell me now. Answer after me now.
We
Yeah.
don't know.
I'll just add I thought it was, this is kind of gives me like chills about portraiture, the portrait with the hand where it's, the one that David Shakespeare has the presentation, Is This the Face of Shakespeare on? Lee Durkee last year came out with a book called Stalking Shakespeare, where it's like he's having this big nervous breakdown and he's looking for different images of Shakespeare. And he starts kind of from like a basic Stratfordian framework, but by the end of it, he's very aware of Oxfordianism. He seems to kind of have a unique theory where he thinks like folk revel is more involved than, but he's definitely kind of off the traditional Stratfordian. But like he's done interviews with Oxfordians and stuff. So, but anyway, he quotes that there's a Stratfordian scholar in like the 1940s, and I forget who, but this Stratfordian Orthodox scholar sees this image of what we think is Edward de Vere. And all of a sudden he says, he writes, he's like, I don't know why, I started sweating, my heart started pounding, and I had this totally irrational conviction that I was staring at an image of the face of Shakespeare. He's like, I have no idea why I think this. I have no idea where this belief comes from, but somehow this Stratfordian Orthodox scholar sees an image of Edward de Vere and all of a sudden just has this like intuition that he's looking in the face of Shakespeare. And he never knows why. So I thought that was a cool story.
Oh,
What a great story, Phoebe.
I
love
know.
what do you have there,
There's
Bonnie?
stuff going on a lot of levels, I think.
it. Yeah, intuition is a powerful thing. Who's that, Bonnie?
Yeah.
What have you got?
My mother and Richard Rowe, who did a very good work, believes that this comes from, and there's a name for it, I'm blanking on it right now. It's a representation of Henry IV, and that this is Edward de Vere when he played Henry IV.
Oh, playing Henry IV.
Playing Henry IV.
Wow.
If you look at this, you'll see
Wow.
it's similar to the Gerhardts.
Yeah.
Dick Rowe wanted to make sure that after my mother passed away, that I didn't lose track of this thing. I
Yeah.
don't know where mother got it from. And then Darren Charlton gave me, I was at a conference in New York, and he the one at White Plains, and he was there, and he did phenomenal work. And he gave me another very, very, very similar, and he said, Bonner, this is important. You should have it. And so and it's very similar.
That's really cool, Bonner. Yeah.
There are a number of these of takes like this because people had, in fact, we obsessed with Lord Garland. They love to have the kings of England all across in their great manor homes. It was very important to have it, and I'm not sure where this particular take of Henry IV came from. But as I said, in the costume, this is what they think. And I sure wish they were both here today so I could ask them and get more detail. But the similarity between this face and the Gerhardts is pretty, and the Gerhardts, which is and he's being painted in costume in the Gerhardts. He's costumed from an earlier time frame, a little earlier, not that much earlier, but the Earl of Leicester's in that similar garb, and a lot of other people.
Yeah, I'd just like to point out that there's a couple of sites that people have very helpfully and thoughtfully put up in the chat that may be wiki sites.
Yeah.
To go look at those. Good.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
people may want to take a look at those.
Yeah, that would be good.
I'm gonna move on here just because, sorry, folks, if we're not getting to you quickly. Giuseppe's been very patient. He's asked. This is sort of going into how we spread the word on this. And any tips or advice for hosting an authorship discussion, maybe at a local high school or library? Has anyone tried that? Do you know what works well when you're trying to reach out to your local public? Or
well, the best advice I've got, I mean, I've done several presentations, and of course my authorship 101 thing is up on the SOF website.
and it's
The
excellent
best advice, when I first was asked to do a presentation about 18 years ago or something, I came up with a 70-minute presentation because I thought you needed to put, everything in, including the kitchen sink. And then the second time I gave it, I was able to cut it down to about 60 minutes. And then I was asked to do one at a assisted living community nearby. And the activities director there said, do not go over 45 minutes or you will lose the audience or they'll just fall asleep. And it was really, really difficult for me, to pare down what I thought was an excellent 60-minute presentation to a 45-minute presentation. But it was great, great advice. And then for the Authorship 101 video, I cut it to 30 minutes, which was even harder to figure out what to leave out. But I would say just try to hit the high points. And I assume what most people do, you've got to say something about the paucity of the evidence for Shakespeare of Stratford. You can't just start in and talk about Oxford and not talk about Shakespeare. And so I think the usual tactic to take is to say, well, here's what we know. Here are some of the stone cold facts we know about Shakespeare. Here's what people say happened to him, but there's no evidence for this, starting with the evidence that he went to school or traveled or knew languages or, could write, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And just try to keep it simple and keep it to the main points. You're not going to be able to persuade somebody who's entrenched, whether it's 30 minutes or 30 hours. You just want to get people's mind, to at least say, well, there seems to be at least some reasonable doubt about whether Shakespeare of Stratford is the guy. And, I think that's the best way to start.
Yeah. I
But
think
I wanted to ask Phoebe, for people who are in your age and younger,
yeah.
what works? Phoebe.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess I'll just add on to what Alex said, because Alex said great stuff. I think maybe I wasn't sure if the question had also just been asking about like reaching out to institutions and like how do you email like a library or school even to get the ball rolling. Like if you have your amazing, Alex McNeil style like lecture, and then how do you set it up? I feel like I think for me, and I'm so bad at this, like when people ask me what I do, or when people ask me, I get so uncomfortable and I get so flustered, and I'm so worried that they're going to immediately jump down my throat and be like, how can you bring up this terrible conspiracy? And I think actually, like, play it cool. I think if you're going to write an email to an institution or something, I think appealing to authority, and by saying, yeah, this is like you can mention like articles, or say this is a really interesting topic that's been covered in such and such, or covered by scholars from such and such institutions. Like just kind of invoke, like I don't know, like Lyle's in the comments. Lyle Colombo did, I think, an amazing job, like helping to organize stuff in New Orleans, because she's works at Tulane. So I think going from trust and acting normal, and so if you have prestige or legitimacy by virtue of your affiliation with an institution, or people know you at your local library or whatever, and they know you're not some crank or some weirdo, and you just send it a normal email coming from a place of strength and confidence, as opposed to like, I'm here to, fight City Hall. I think that people are very receptive typically.
And Cheryl leaves a comment saying, I can speak to our experience at the National English Teachers Conference. High school teachers are very interested, capitals, in this topic. Students love it.
Yeah,
So
I know. I
big
screw myself
opening.
over all the time by assuming that people are going to be skeptical, or assuming that people are going to be closed off to it, especially with young people. Most young people don't even like, they're just like, Shakespeare's like some really, really old, boring guy. And so if you tell them anything that at least sparks interest, like I think that we're all, because we spend our lives banging our head against the wall of like, and me for many fewer years than so many of my like esteemed, amazing colleagues here, like, I think we're over biased towards the idea that people are going to hate what we're saying, whereas people are actually starting to really be just interested and curious, and they just want to hear from you. And
I've noted,
about it, they're excited to learn about Shakespeare because it's like a highbrow, cool thing.
I've noted here before that just over the years, one thing I've seen is the stigma seems to be kind of evaporating.
Yeah.
Not to our patient's level, but there doesn't seem to be the crackpot stigma attached to this, especially maybe those people have died off by now, but the young people are a lot more open to this. One thing you've done, Phoebe, that I've seen, this is an important communication point, is you refer to him as Edward de Vere, not Oxford.
Yes.
I think
that's so important for
the nobility
SEO.
thing is a turnoff.
That's for me, my big thing is like, who is Edward de Vere? Like, again, it's like some guy named Oxford. Oh, you mean like the college in England, huh? And we're already having the wrong conversation. You know what I mean? Like, it's so hard to even understand what Oxfordianism is. Whereas if you talk about, there's this really exciting thing in the Elizabethan court, and there was this really like dashing, brilliant, the most famous guy you've never heard of, who was a raconteur and a party boy and a playboy and a Tory. Like, people like fill in the blanks of who this exciting person is, and people have this sort of like I think, anything that you can offer, people are going to be receptive to, unless they have skin in the game. Like, I think basically now it's like you can kind of go around. Like, I think that, you know, unless people really have skin in the game where they're like, no, you know, I don't, if your job depends on you not believing the truth or whatever, you know, that kind of quote is like, yeah, I think people are just curious. And I'm talking to myself because I'm so guilty of this.
We go, gosh, we've got just a few minutes left
Phoebe's
here and
game.
lots of good questions.
Yeah, let's play my game. Okay, we'll do a speed round. It's fine. Okay, so
Explain
first thing, I'm just gonna put in the chat. So January 25th on Zoom, or I think it's actually gonna be on my YouTube channel, but it doesn't. Here's the link to RSVP for the Oxford's Voices Theater Festival, where we're gonna have like performances of 3 of the plays that Bob Proctor is saying Edward de Vere wrote, one of which he presented on at the conference. Sorry, I'm pulling up the he pulled up at the conference where he was talking about Dido, Queen of Carthage, gave a presentation. So we're going to hear some of that, as well as David and Bathsheba and sorry, I'm doing too many things at once. David and Bathsheba and James IV. So check it out, RSVP, and you'll be kept abreast of the information for how to join us for the Oxford's Voices Theater Festival on Zoom on Jan 25. And now I am sharing my screen because we're going to play this super fun game really quickly, which is we're going to rank, and it's going to be fast and loose. It's basically, I'm just going to push the buttons, but I need you guys to tell me. So these are kind of our Elizabethans, and we're just going to decide. S is like supreme or something. It's the top one. So we're just going to rank them very subjectively, controversially. We're hopefully making people mad and arguing with one another about just like the rankings of these Elizabethans in terms of their quality, their power, their aura, and their vibes. All right, I'm going to start with Edward de Vere. I think we can all agree he's at the top tier, right?
Yep.
Well, Elizabeth might be the top.
I know. Elizabeth, it's funny. This one I accidentally, kind of like a Freudian slip, her got cut off, but I was like, she's in the tier above the top tier. So that felt apropos. Okay. Earl of Leicester, what tier is it?
He is absolutely in the top tier. I think he's the most powerful man in England.
Okay. Wow.
Truly. From fear. From
fear. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
okay.
even Elizabeth said so. So there you go. The Queen said.
Somebody says
Cecil?
Burley was probably way up there.
Yeah.
All right, Burley's also top tier. Okay.
Well, why don't we just put everybody in the top tier?
Okay.
You can put Shakespeare at the bottom.
Yeah. Well, who knows? Maybe he's okay. So John D. What tier?
C.
Sort of mid lower.
C? Yeah.
He has a secret. It's a secret tier.
Okay, so C for secret. John D. Penelope Rich. What tier?
Yeah, I'm gonna give her a C, B, C again, kind of middle. I think she.
Yeah, she kind of
that important.
Okay, so this is Robert Greene.
Yeah, who was Robert Greene?
Yeah, who was he? Writing in his death shroud, writing from the dead. So that's pretty top tier behavior.
Didn't exist.
Didn't exist.
No, he didn't exist. So we might have to put him out.
Somebody says D needs to be higher. We've got John D fans. Green.
Oh, D needs to be higher. Okay, I'll put him up.
I'll put D to B. Okay.
Okay, Philip.
Oh wow. You know what my answer is? Yeah. I know there are people who adore Philip, but I'm not one of them.
I don't know that he had that big an influence on the whole.
He's a puppy.
I'm gonna put him next to Penelope Rich.
He adored her. I think we can at least put them together.
Yeah. They're happy. Okay, Robert
definitely is an A-lister.
Is an A-lister, or is he the S?
Oh, I think he's probably in the S. Yep.
Okay. All right. This is speaking of S. Here's the Stratford man.
Oh, put him in the D's.
D. Okay, and then this is who can identify this? Do people know who this is?
You told me.
Well, yeah, I know you do. Can people in the chat? Can people guess?
For some people, it's very small, so I'm sure
it's very small. Okay, it's the Duke de Alençon.
Oh yeah, Duke Alençon. Yeah.
Oh, I'd put him down in the C's.
Okay, all right, that's our list.
Okay.
Thanks for playing.
Yeah, we've got an hour.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, no, he's the bot. Yeah, that's funny because he's bottom, so he could be on the bottom.
Exactly, he is bottom.
Well, Shakespeare just sort of borrowed everybody else's supremacy, and it's been grafted onto him. But we've got so many good questions here that we haven't gotten to, so I'm going to keep them up on
My
hand
computer's
for the
legit.
future.
We can go a couple minutes longer if people don't mind. I don't want to, drag it on too much, but pick a good one, Jonathan.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, this one about John Oldcastle and Falstaff, it probably gets too much into detail. Robert Prechter, that probably would get into too much. Let's just do very quickly, because I know you've brought this up, Bonner, recently. In Shakespeare's unorthodox biography, Diana Price casts aspersions on the claim that the man from Stratford was an actor. Her book was 2001. Since then, has there been further research that would corroborate her idea that he was not an actor at all, or knock out or weaken this pillar? Personally, I think there's enough. I mean, things come up like they refer to him as Shakespeare, or even Shakespeare, they call him the player in the arms thing. Like Cuthbert Burbage later stuck him in a group of players, and when he wouldn't necessarily have to. I think he probably was, but just not as high tier or a big star or anything. Maybe he did that among his other brokering things, I think, but I don't think he was ever an important actor. But to me, there's enough evidence that he had his toe in it maybe for a while, and then maybe left London a lot earlier than people think he did.
I'd agree with Jonathan.
You asked if there's been work since Diana Price's book.
Yeah, so that's
Actually,
a question.
There was work before that. I was just because I had recalled that Richard Whalen in his book Shakespeare, Who Was He? He agrees with Diana Price. He doesn't put as much detail into it, but he goes through that and kind of along the same lines as Diana Price. So she does have more detail as she goes through the things like the John Manningham diary and the what was the writ of it? The writ of, I forget now, it was sort of like a restraining order between Francis Langley at the Swan and that, which actually, to me, that puts him in the theater venue, and it is a legal document that seems to go around unexplained. But at any rate, Richard Whalen goes through that as well as Diana Price. So I don't know if anyone since that time has gotten in there to deconstruct it, but at any rate.
Bonner, was that as what a player and actor, or was that associated with the theater in some capacity?
I have a theory about that, the player is on a coat of arms, and there were many, many copies of that coat of arms. I don't believe it was original with a coat of arms because there were so many copies of it. And I think this was found in the Harleian, which is 100-something years. The Harleian documents that are now at the no, where are they? They're in the Lansdowne at the British, or they're at the British Museum along with the Lansdowne. But because if he had been a player, he would not have gotten a coat of arms. Players were not somebody, and somebody says that too. I think Diana Price, but so you could research that, but that has got to be something that came from another hand that is, I don't believe that's authentic. That gets quoted as if it were, but that's my theory, and you can tell me if I'm wrong.
And we are distinguishing.
I'm not dead silence.
No, but we're distinguishing Will of Stratford or Shakespeare from the name William Shakespeare. Yes. We are separating those in this discussion. So we're talking about the man who grew up in Stratford.
Stratford fella. Okay. It's a wrap-up time.
Okay,
thank you, everybody.
You've got something for us, don't you?
What? Oh, well, another tune, you mean?
Please, Jonathan, please. You got to sing us. You sung us in, you got to sing us out.
Okay. We'll end on this. Let me talk a little bit first. Because somebody said, here's a festive topic. England is all about Dickens, who invented Christmas. Shakespeare, not so much. Shakespeare doesn't really get into Christmas that much. There's A Winter's Tale. There's Twelfth Night is the closest thing to it. So any final words before I do my little setting?
I think it's because Christmas as we know it wasn't the same for them. Their gifts were New Year gifts, and on Christmas night, that's when Twelfth Night began, but Christmas itself is a religious holiday.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. Here's, if you want to look it up on YouTube, I have a little, I call it an EP, extended play album of settings I've done of Shakespeare songs over the years for various reasons. So this is on there. Oh, Mistress Mine from Twelfth Night. Okay.
Oh, mistress mine, where are you roaming? Oh, stay and hear your true love's coming, that can sing both high and low. Trip no further, pretty sweeting, journey's ending, lovers meeting, every wise man's son doth know. What is loved is not hereafter, present mirth hath present laughter, what's to come is still unsure. In delay there lies no plenty, then come kiss me, sweet and 20, youth's a stuff will not endure.
Thank you so much, Jonathan.
The album version sounds more like a Morris dance. Okay.
Happy
Thank you,
holidays.
everybody.